As an actor, I have portrayed Theo, the little-known brother of artist Vincent Van Gogh. Somehow, I related so strongly to the story of the two brothers that I became obsessed with Theo's struggle to defend Vincent and to prove that he was not insane. Most people, including many experts, believe that Vincent Van Gogh was mad. His brother didn't, and I have evidence that he was right.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
This, for me, is a personal search. A search for a man who painted brilliant impressions of sunflowers and starry nights. He was called Madman by many, and in fact, he did cut off part of his own ear. But was he really mad? He was born twice, and he had a deep feeling for family. Yet, he considered himself a stranger on the earth. Vincent Van Gogh. Today, 14 of his works are displayed here in the celebrated Louvre Museum in Paris. In a feverish 10-year period, though plagued by illness, he turned out 1,800 pieces of work, many of which sell for as much as $1 million each today. Clearly, Van Gogh belongs in the pantheon of the world's greatest artists. How could works of such beauty be the product of a deranged mind? Vincent van Gogh, Dutchman, painter, impressionist, lover of love, God, and art, took this route to the south of France after a year of painting and studying in Paris. As I followed his trail, I reviewed my research. From collections of his preliminary sketches, we know that he studied his art logically, precisely. He was well-read. He knew 5 languages. His work was not accidental. It was an act of choice and use of skills which he had worked hard and long to acquire. For me, something here rang a jarring note. How could this man work so diligently, skillfully? How could he write more than 500 beautiful letters to Theo, so sensitive and full of enlightened insight, if he were actually insane? Whatever Vincent's problem was, it began to appear here in the south of France. What I hoped to find was the cause. Was it the intense loneliness? Was it the burning southern sky? Was it the maddening mistral wind, lack of proper food, or the feverish work itself? What caused the man to fall to the depths of illness and despair while his work soared to the heights of brilliance? My first stop in the town of Arles would be the corner where Vincent lived, in what became known as the Yellow House. The adjacent sidewalk cafe is still open for business. I stopped to absorb the atmosphere. The Yellow House had been destroyed during World War II. All that remains is Vincent's luminescent painting. Here, Vincent dreamed of starting a community of artists, and Paul Gauguin was invited to be its leader. Gauguin, eloquent, outspoken, and arrogant. He had deserted his wife and 5 children in favor of painting. To share his home, Vincent could not have picked a more unsuitable partner. But Vincent, thrilled by Gauguin's acceptance, painted masterpieces to decorate the walls. Gauguin arrived and flattered Vincent by painting his portrait. They worked together and they socialized together. But soon, more than anything, they argued. Vincent, always the straightforward, passionate seeker of truth. Gauguin, caustic, cool, baiting Vincent as a matador might taunt a bull. Eventually, Vincent wrote, "I think our friend Gauguin has become tired of our house, the little town of Arles, and especially me." Was it the agitation of the argument? Was it alcohol? Was it illness? What triggered the famous events which followed? According to Gauguin's version of the story, he took a walk into the night. He was being followed. It was Vincent with a razor. Gauguin later reported, "I stared him down with a look." What really happened, we will never know. Then, Vincent performed the act most widely presented as evidence of his insanity. He went back to his room and severed half his ear. Later that night, he delivered a bizarre gift to a prostitute named Rachel at a local brothel and said, "Gardez cet objet précieusement." Guard this object carefully. It was the severed ear. Why? The answer may lie in a previous relationship with a prostitute named Christine. When Vincent met her, she had a child and was expecting another. Vincent felt he could save her from the streets. It was a noble effort, but a failure. The lady did not want to change her lifestyle. Was there for Vincent a connection between his past and the present? The hospital at Arles, where Vincent Van Gogh was treated after he had slashed his ear. Why had he done it? And was he really mad? Why was he suffering such personal pain while his work was soaring? Here I hoped to find some answers. I quickly recognized the garden of one of his famous paintings. And now, the first real clues began to emerge. In the hospital records, I found the diagnosis of his illness. The key word was a total surprise: epilepsy. Dr. Ray, his physician, diagnosed Vincent as epileptic, suffering from seizures, hallucinations. He was hearing voices which taunted him, terrified him. Vincent's biblical training had taught him, if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out. I wonder if Vincent was trying to silence an offending ear. The isolation chamber where Vincent was locked up during his stay at the hospital. This was his view of the world when he wrote, "Dear Theo, I write to you in full possession of my faculties, and not as a madman, but as the brother you know. A certain number of people addressed a petition to the mayor, describing me as a man not fit to be at liberty. The commissioner of police then gave the order to shut me up without my guilt being proved or even open to proof. I have done no harm to anyone. After his release, Vincent was embittered and deeply pained by the cruel actions of the people of Arles. He realized that he was ill, but felt that he deserved help rather than punishment. It became obvious that he would suffer periodic hallucinatory attacks, which terrified him. Vincent and his brother Theo decided that he should have constant medical supervision. He signed himself into the asylum at Saint-Remy. It was understood that he would be allowed to paint whenever he was well enough to do so. He wrote to his brother, "I think I have done well to come here. The idea of work as a duty is coming back very strong. I have 2 landscapes done, views among the hills. One is the country I see from the window of my bedroom, a boundary wall, and beyond it, the gray foliage of a few olive trees and the hills."
Though here there are some patients very seriously ill, the fear and horror of madness that I used to have has lessened a great deal. When I'm working in the garden, they all come to look. And I assure you, they have the discretion and the manners to leave me alone. More than I can say for the good people of the town of Arles.
A major newspaper article now praised Vincent as the leader of the Impressionists, and one of his canvases was sold for the equivalent of $80, his first sale. He was 36. No other painting would be sold in his lifetime. The quality and quantity of his work was enormous. He captured, enhanced, and enriched whatever he saw. He said, "I feel as if nature has spoken to me." The pattern of Vincent's life now was defined. The attacks were almost predictable, approximately every 3 months. They were followed by periods of recovery and feverish work. Hardly the pattern of a madman. And then again, the next attack. The voices, always the damnable voices that beleaguered his brain. In May 1890, after 2 years in the South, Vincent's loneliness and his longing to see his brother and the North again prompted a decision to leave Saint-Remy. Before following Vincent's trail to Auvers, I had one more important stop to make. The nature of Vincent's illness was now clear, but what about his mysticism? Why did he suspect that there was another side to existence? Why did he see death as a trip to a star? Perhaps at his birthplace, I would find some answers. Certainly, the family offered no clue. His father, a minister in the Reformed Church, both parents, straightforward, no nonsense, bound by tradition. No mysteries here. And yet, during his brief career as an evangelist among the miners in Belgium, Vincent preached that he was a stranger on the earth. Why? In Zundert, Holland, I made an amazing discovery. In the early 1850s, a strange ritual took place at this church every Sunday. Young Vincent Van Gogh visits a grave which bears his own name. The grave is that of a brother who was still born. Both Vincents were born on exactly the same date, 1 year apart. He lived his entire childhood with a ghost that bore his name. Could this Sunday ritual have planted the seeds of his mysticism? In Auvers, a suburb of Paris, arrangements were made for him to live in a room over the Café Ravoux, now called the Café Van Gogh. He was placed under the care of a sympathetic doctor named Gachet. The current owner of the Gachet house, Madame Vandenbroek.
Vincent came earlier than expected and was terribly impatient. He came out here unannounced and came like a bombshell on the terrace and was standing there in the bright sunlight when he was discovered and ushered into the dining room. The doctor was called, and when the dining room shutters were slightly closed because of the strong sunshine, and Vincent, who wanted to see the view, threw them open and was standing there just drinking it all in, and the first sight the doctor had of his patient and friend was that one.
He was indeed impatient, and perhaps he had good reason. When he arrived in Auvers, he had 70 days to live. Is it possible that he knew that? In those 70 days, he turned out 100 pieces of work, as if he were in a race against time. On a Sunday morning, the 27th of July, 1890, Vincent, as usual, took his paint box, easel, and brushes and walked up this road to the nearby fields. He was also carrying a gun. He was about to make a decision. Regardless of our moral reaction to his act, it must be recognized as a deliberate choice. After lying unconscious all day in the hot sun, he managed to stagger back to the cafe. What occurred in the last hours of his life most clearly indicates that he was not mad, but obviously a man afflicted with a physical problem which drove him to a desperate act. His brother received the news the next day and came immediately.
When Theo stepped into this room, he expected to find his brother either unconscious or dead. He was shocked to find Vincent sitting up in his bed, calmly smoking his pipe. Vincent asked his brother not to cry. He said, "I did it for the good of everyone." Dr. Gachet said that Vincent's wound wasn't really that serious, and Vincent had a strong constitution. His chances of recovery were good, but Vincent was very stubborn about it. It seemed as though he was determined to succeed in his own death. He said, "I've been a failure at so many things in my lifetime. I hope I haven't failed at this as well." Theo held his hands, and they talked late into the night. And then Theo said, "I felt his hands weaken, and his voice grew fainter. I sat on the bed. I cradled him in my arms. I kissed his face, and he looked up at me and he said, 'Theo, I wish I could die like this.' And then," said Theo, "he closed his eyes and I felt his heart stop. I held him close. I didn't want to let him go. I felt his soul lingering near me for those next few moments, and then something went out of me, and he was gone.
Vincent's brother Theo, his only lifelong friend and support, went into a physical and emotional decline, and 6 months later joined his brother in death.
With the Mistral wind, the heat of the sun, his illness, it's amazing that Vincent Van Gogh accomplished as much as he did. While it is interesting and worthwhile to investigate the man, the power and the magnificence of his work are awesome. Today, the controversy about Vincent Van Gogh continues. He was a very complicated man. He was sometimes difficult, sometimes stubborn, mystical, loving, self-destructive, and always passionate. I set out looking for answers to a set of intellectual questions. Some of those questions have been answered, some still remain mysteries. But I found something that was, in a sense, beyond the search, and I think even more important. In my efforts to understand the man, I found a new and even deeper appreciation for the beauty that he gave us.